He is an award-winning author of the book, if you haven't read it, The Genie in Your Genes, which offers insights into the link between emotions and genetics. He's the founder of the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare, which studies and implements evidence-based psychological and medical techniques. He's published, I can't even count how many scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals that have to do with EFT. He's collaborated with scholars at multiple universities around the world with outcome studies from PTSD to depression to anxiety. He's the editor, in case you don't already get the peer-reviewed journal, the only peer-reviewed journal we have for EFT, which is Energy Psychology Theory, Research, and Treatment. He's the general manager of Energy Psychology Press, the director of EFTuniverse.com, one of the most visited alternative medicine sites on the web, the head of EFT Universe. I could just keep going on, and basically EFT research with Dawson would almost not exist. I mean, really. Yeah. So without further ado, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Dawson Church.
Oh, Craig, thank you so much. How wonderful to look out at that beautiful group of faces, many of whom I know in person. I see lots of friends there. Thank you so much for being there. And did you know that Craig and Lena donate most of the net income from the Northwest Tappers Gathering every year to EFT research? So Craig and Lena, thank you so much. And everyone there in the room. We've had several studies published as a direct result of the Northwest Tappers Gathering, and I'm so thrilled that you're doing that, you have that vision, and that you're taking concrete action to make it happen. So I'd like to talk about a number of things, both personal and also scientific now, but first of all, I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to take your hands, I'd like you to just stroke your cheeks, like you were stroking a baby's cheeks. Just imagine stroking a little baby like this. That's what you do. If you saw a beautiful child, you say, "Oh, you beautiful baby." You stroke the baby's cheeks like that. Now, when you do that, that's the little experiment I wanted to show you. When you do that, research on brainwaves shows that your delta waves expand up to 80-fold. You have this massive increase in delta waves. And delta waves are the basic wave of your sense of connection with the universe, your sense of well-being. When meditators are in a state of oceanic bliss, when they are going into alpha states and into theta and into delta, those slow brain waves, they have a large increase of delta. And in a research project I've been doing with Dr. Joe Dispenza, we have been studying people in meditation, and we find that they're having massive increases in delta. And their high ratio, the ratio of high frequency brain waves, mostly beta waves, to low frequency waves, delta waves, changes drastically as they meditate. It was so cool. I was doing a workshop at the New York Open Center last week, and we had people hooked up to EEG machines, and we had neurofeedback experts hooking them up and then reading their alpha, beta, theta, delta, gamma waves while we tapped. And it was amazing to see the reaction of these neuroscientists. They were sitting there, and like after the first session, they came to me and said, "Dawson, we're seeing amazing things here. We're seeing huge increases in delta, your slow wave, again, that wave of oceanic bliss. We're seeing increases in theta waves. Theta waves are the characteristic brain wave of healers." Pioneer called Dr. Robert Beck in the 1960s began to hook up meditators and highly creative people and yogis and highly advanced adepts to EEGs. And what he found was that when they were in their normal waking states, their brain waves were just like yours or mine, pretty much, just the usual normal brain function. But when they entered a healing space, when they entered a space of compassion in their hearts, when they sent out love to other people, when they would use their hands to heal, he found a large increase in those slow waves, especially theta waves. So theta waves are the big wave of healing. And the interesting thing was that some of the people he hooked up were Christian, faith healers. They would pray for people, and they did the ancient biblical tradition of laying on of hands. Or they were holy roller Pentecostals, and they were speaking in tongues and laying on hands and praying for people. Or some of them were chi masters. Some of them were projecting qigong into their clients. Others were psychics. And he found it didn't matter what their philosophical or religious background was. From Native American shamans to Australian Aboriginal shamans to modern faith healers, to healing touch practitioners, to Pentecostals, all of them, when they were in that healing space, had huge flares of theta waves. So theta waves and delta. And when you just touch your cheek like that, you produce this big increase in delta. And as we meditated with those people at the Open Center, as we tapped with them, their ratios of those waves changed dramatically in the course of just a few moments. Their high frequency brain waves, beta waves, that's the thinking brain and the anxious brain. People having a panic attack will have a huge flare of that high frequency beta wave. Those waves just went way, way, way down, and those healing waves came out, and also those oceanic bliss delta waves came out that you were able to generate just by touching your cheek. So we now know that amazing, exciting, powerful shifts are happening inside the body when you tap. The initial research into EFT was simple. It was pen and paper research. People would take a pen and a paper, they'd fill out a research form, they do it at the beginning of a workshop, they do it after a workshop. And after I got about 200 of these forms from people at various workshops, I sent them all to the University of Arizona in 2008 and had them do a statistical analysis of what was going on with people's levels of anxiety and depression and hostility and phobias and all these psychological symptoms. And they found that there was a massive drop in all of those psychological symptoms over the course of just one day of EFT. The other thing we did in those one-day workshops is we were measuring people's levels of cravings for salt, cravings for sugar, cravings for chocolate, cravings for cigarettes, for alcohol, for sweets, for pastries, all kinds of things. And we found that their levels of cravings dropped by 83% in the course of a half hour of tapping. Their pain went down by 68% in a half hour of tapping. All kinds of shifts happened in their psychology and their perception of the world when they tapped. So the early research was all like that. It was all looking at the psychological and the related kinds of symptoms that we could measure and see what was happening. And that made me really, really confident. So 2006, 2007, 2008, I was doing that sort of psychological research. But then I began to think to myself, you know, if we're seeing these big drops in pain, big drops in cravings, big drops in anxiety, big drops in depression, big drops in stress, things must be happening inside their bodies, because when our psychology changes, our biology changes. There is no mind-body split. The mind-body split is a complete construct. Our minds and bodies are functioning on a continuum. One of the earliest people calling themselves a psychologist was Wilhelm Wundt. He had a lab in Leipzig in Germany in the 1860s and 70s, and he was doing experiments with primates. And he talked about that mind-body continuum. He said that there is no mind-body separation, that body and mind are one. And this is 150 years ago. Advanced psychologists already realized that, and only recently in the 20th century has this illusion arisen that we go and treat people. We treat their bodies independently of their minds. A survey came out of people in Britain this last week. It showed the average pensioner, 65 and over, so these are elderly people in Great Britain, massive study of people in the National Health Service. And it's easy to collect data in Britain because everyone belongs to a single-payer healthcare system, which I devoutly hope will soon be the case in America. But it's easy to collect data that way because it's an efficient way of getting a large number of people together. You collect their data, you can then analyze the trends. But they found a very disturbing thing, and that is that the average 65-plus-year-old person, adult, is on 5 medications, an average of 5 medications. Some people were on over 20 medications. And I got to tell you, that is completely the wrong way to go. If you may need a medication. I'm not in any way knocking surgery or drugs or any of the marvels of modern medicine. We need all those things, but we need them in context. We need them in the context of a health-based system. And so if you have anxiety, if you have depression, you may need a drug, but why not do what those 200 plus healthcare workers did, which was tap? Because we saw their levels of anxiety and depression drop by 45% in just one day of tapping. And those that tapped more in the following 3 and 6 months, they got even better than those that didn't do it after that. So look for natural ways of addressing your problems. Find ways of triggering delta, triggering that healing wave of theta, triggering alpha waves in your brain, diminishing that monkey mind beta. So I began to look at these physiological phenomena, like how is your brain processing information? What kind of hormones are prevalent in your body? Which kinds of neurotransmitters are prevalent in your brain? And what are their ratios? And this is now providing some absolutely fascinating results. I think the most intriguing one is a study done by a psychotherapist called Marjorie Beth Maharaj, and it was published in Energy Psychology Journal a year ago in November. And Beth was a graduate student, very experienced psychotherapist, also a tapper, and she wondered what was happening in people's bodies when they tapped. Now, her study cost about $50,000 to do. It was an expensive study, but she was a committed therapist and wanted to find out what was happening in people's bodies when they used EFT. So in her study, she used this novel way of collecting gene signals using saliva. People essentially provide a little saliva sample, that goes off to a lab, and then about 6 months and $1,000 later, you get a result. And you can tell a lot about what's happening in the body genetically from the saliva. Not as good as a blood sample. Blood samples are still better than saliva samples for getting a wide range of gene expression. But she was able to identify gene expression in people's saliva. And what she did was she took 4 people without any history of psychological problems. She gave them a placebo intervention one weekend, and she tested their gene expression before and after that placebo. Then, a week later, they did an EFT session, and she tested their gene expression before and after that. Now again, these aren't what genes they have. These are what genes are expressed. Genes that are expressed are genes you're using. Just like, for example, some of my 2 favorite hormones to study are DHEA, which is your main anti-aging hormone, and also cortisol, your main stress hormone. So she was looking at the genes that code for that. When you get stressed, when you get upset, when you get annoyed, when you get irritated, what happens is your levels of cortisol rise, and when your levels of cortisol rise, your levels of DHEA, your main rejuvenation hormone, fall. And when you get de-stressed, when you're relaxed, your levels of cortisol fall and your levels of DHEA rise. Now, we've known this for a long time. We've studied this. There are huge numbers of studies showing the effect of stress on cortisol. We know though, that cancer patients tend to have high cortisol. Some studies have found that cortisol literally docks with receptor sites on the surface of cancer cells. Cortisol and adrenaline literally feed cancer in your body. They do much more than that. Adrenaline literally shuts down an enzyme called FAK, and FAK is how your body tags and kills cancer cells. When you have high adrenaline, high cortisol, shuts down your FAK. Your body can't tag and kill cancer cells. Also, cancer cells, to clump together and form a mass, a tumor, have to communicate with each other. And the body has natural disruptors that interrupt the signaling of cancer cells. So those cancer cells are trying to clump together and form a tumor, but your body has signals it's sending throughout the body. It's saying, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you won't clump together. No, you'll be separated and you'll be destroyed one by one. So a body has these mechanisms for interrupting the communication of cancer cells and stopping them. from forming a tumorous mass? Well, when you have high adrenaline, high cortisol, boom, you interrupt that signaling that your body is naturally doing. All that signaling your body is naturally doing, saying, no, cancer cells, you can't clump together, that gets interrupted by adrenaline and cortisol. And so you have high stress, and suddenly all these natural cancer defense mechanisms your body has are shut down because of that high stress. So high cortisol, low DHEA. Cancer patients typically have high cortisol and an average of half the DHEA, the cell repair hormone, in their bodies. So what I began to do recently over the last few years is look not just at the hormones, but at the levels of genes. Because to build those DHEA molecules, to build those cortisol molecules, your body needs a blueprint. And that blueprint is in the genes. And so if you get stressed, if you get upset, get worried, get anxious, angry, get resentful, then that mental state, that emotional state, sends a signal, a stress signal, to those genes that code for cortisol and adrenaline and says, turn on. A friend of mine had a horrible experience a few months ago. She was taking a walk by the ocean, and she was just walking there, and there were several other people that were in her neighborhood walking along the path as well, and they stopped to admire the scenery on the cliff face. One of the people who was walking along there with her had a dog, and so she was chatting with a guy about a dog. Other people were close by, and suddenly, without any warning, this dog was a pit bull, sprang at her and sunk its teeth into her thigh and took a chunk out of her thigh about the size of my hand, out of her thigh. So again, huge stress response. Now, when we have that stress response, that's appropriate. Our bodies are meant to go into high adrenaline, high cortisol when that happens. And so there was a whole series of things happened after that. She's fine now. She healed amazingly quickly. We all were sending her energy. We were all doing energy work with her. And in fact, my wife, Christine, her phrase for our friend was, our friend heals so quickly. We would tap and say this, our friend heals so quickly, the doctors are amazed by her progress. Sure enough, we checked in with her about 3 weeks later, and she said to us, Dawson and Christine, the doctor said when I went today, my doctor said she's amazed by my progress. So energy is a powerful boost to our healing, but you're meant to have high adrenaline and high cortisol when you're escaping from a pit bull. But if our friend was then telling us the story a month later, or a year later, or 5 years later, and still getting all upset and having shortness of breath and having tight shoulder blades and having a rise in blood pressure, that's inappropriate stress. And many of you are living with inappropriately high levels of cortisol. You're living as though you were in a world full of cave bears and competing for scarce resources, and you're not. So we tend to have high levels of cortisol. To build these big, complex molecules of adrenaline and cortisol, our body needs blueprints. And so those blueprints are used by our body, and those blueprints are the genes. So when we have that memory of a bad thing, like the dog attack, or the real dog attack, either one is driving our levels of cortisol high, is sending a signal to those genes to turn on. And then when those genes turn on, then we have a rise in those stress hormones. So what we're now doing is we're studying those genes. And it is amazing what we're finding. So Beth Maharaj took her 4 people, analyzed their gene expression before and after a placebo hour, then before and after just 1 hour of EFT. And she found that after 1 hour of EFT, 72 genes were turned on, were upregulated, were dialed up by just 1 hour of tapping. So you've been tapping there today. You probably tap every day. I wake up in the morning, and I didn't even know what I'm tapping about. My wife says to me sometimes, Dawson, why are you tapping? It's like, I'm tapping. It's rather and essay questions. I don't know why I'm tapping. So, but it just feels good. It feels good. It feels soothing to tap. So you're tapping, and you are then turning on those genes. Here are some of those 72 genes and their functions that she found were upregulated, were dialed up by EFT. Tumor necrosis factors, TNFs. TNFs, tumor necrosis factors, are genes that help our body identify and kill cancer cells. Tumor necrosis factors. Tumor necrosis just means cancer death. It's like the body sees a cancer cell and goes, getting rid of that thing right now. Those tumor necrosis factors were dialed up. Several different ones were dialed up for several different kinds of cancer cells to zap those cancer cells. Genes that code for building cells in our neural network, especially to do with memory. Now, I'm giving you a talk here. Obviously, I'm wildly excited about my topic, but I don't have any notes. I don't need to think about that. I don't need to go and read or flip some notes over here, because I can remember all this stuff. I can memorize things. I can memorize complex things, partly because I'm tapping. And we found that those genes that code for having a good memory, being able to turn short-term memories into long-term memories, those genes were all turned on by tapping. Genes that produce the insulation around the neurons in the white matter of your brain. And insulation is really important. It's like a wire. So you have a power cord, like over here. There's a power cord. There's this white cord for my Apple computer. It's got a cable in the middle of it. The cable is made out of copper, and this copper cable is sheathed with this white insulation. Same thing with the axons in your nervous system. You need insulation around the core of the axon, which is carrying the data. If you have leaky insulation or poor insulation, it shorts out and doesn't carry the signal properly. So one of the genes that she found was more highly expressed, dialed up, had to do with increasing that insulation around the stems, around the cables of the neurons in the white matter of your brain. She found genes that had to do with metabolism were turned up. So your metabolism is revved up by tapping. She found genes that code for the production of red blood cells were dialed up. Red blood cells, of course, are carrying nutrients, they're carrying oxygen. Every single cell in your body, she found those genes were dialed up by that 1 hour of EFT. Genes that code for some of the white blood cells that are able to identify and kill invading bacteria and viruses. Those genes were dialed up. Genes that code for substances in your skin that protect your skin from the sun's ultraviolet radiation in the epithelial layer of your skin. Those genes were dialed up. Again, 72 genes were dialed up, and they had pervasive effects across your whole body. So that's where research is going now. More and more research is being done to what's happening inside your body, and it is wildly exciting.